Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Podcast, where we empower Iowa women to succeed in work and life. I'm one of your hosts, Emily Wood, joined by co-host Ladrina Wilson, Fearless editor Kasey Froeschle, and some special guests. I'm excited for today's conversation about self-doubt. There are a lot of factors that affect our confidence, and some of those are in our control and some aren't. Ladrina, when we were preparing for this conversation, you mentioned the internal dialogue that we have with ourselves. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about how often we kind of send ourselves messages and kind of what some of the roots of self-doubt can be. And so then I reflected on my personal experience, and my parents didn't always get it right, but they got one thing like spot on. They always spoke life into me and really built my confidence from a really young age. So when I reflect on when self-doubt comes into play, that voice is usually the loudest when I'm operating in fear. It's not real. It's just there's some other doubt that has surfaced, or some other fear that has surfaced. I watched my mom. She was like a single mom, hyper independent, and she just exuded confidence. And so I thought that was real. As I became an adult, I went on to find out maybe she was kind of faking it until she made it. But because I thought that was real, I began to emulate that. And so now when I think about self-doubt, because I generally am a very confident person, but when I think about self-doubt, it's when that fear creeps in and I have to ask myself, that internal voice, do you actually have proof points? Is there something that you have evidence of that says you're not capable, or that this idea won't work, or you won't succeed? And if I'm honest with myself, I usually don't have a legitimate case for that. I don't have evidence that says that I won't make it, or it won't work out. And so I've been trying to trick myself into remembering that fear and faith require the same thing: a belief in a future state that doesn't exist. So you can choose one or the other. And I think when I think about self-doubt, those are some of the tactics or messages that are kind of playing in the back of my mind when I'm trying to cope. What about you?
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about after we talked is that I remember this memory from when I was a kid. I grew up a swimmer. My sister and I were both competitive swimmers for our whole childhoods, and I remember my very first swim meet, swimming my race, and I got out of the pool and I just started bawling, and my dad's like, what's wrong? And I said, no one was cheering for me. And he's like, what are you talking about? We were all cheering for you. Well, underwater, I couldn't hear that.
Oh,
And as a little kid, I was like, oh, you're supposed to, you should still be able to hear underwater, which is not the case. But I just thought about that as this example of, we're in our own heads, and we sometimes don't even see what other people may be seeing from us. So I think that that self-doubt, confidence piece of it is sometimes what we're saying in our own heads and the internal dialogue.
I bet you had a lot of internal dialogue swimming underwater. I can't even imagine that type of a workout. I know we've got somebody else on who trains a lot too, so I'm just curious about that whole thought process, but that's a whole different episode.
Yeah, for sure. Well, why don't we continue this conversation bringing on our guests for today? So, Melissa Vine is the president of Capital Vine, a commercial loan brokerage where she connects businesses and real estate investors across the country to funding sources. She's a licensed attorney and a licensed mental health counselor, and has been involved in startups, acquisitions, real estate development, and nonprofit leadership. She lives in West Des Moines and is a single mom of 4 almost grown sons. Melissa has been connected with Fearless since our launch 5 years ago. In our very first Fearless publication, she shared her story about leaving an abusive marriage and her experience as a survivor of domestic violence. So thank you so much for being here, Melissa.
Oh, it's great to be back. And I appreciated the insights, Ladrina and Emily, that you both shared about self-doubt. So thank you.
Awesome. So as I mentioned, 5 years ago, you shared your story with Fearless about surviving domestic violence. And there's lots of statistics about the struggles that girls and women have with confidence and self-doubt. But I think we often don't talk about how trauma plays into that. And we know that there are many adverse experiences that predominantly affect women and girls. And that, of course, can dramatically affect our self-image. So I wondered if you could maybe start off with sharing how your experiences with domestic violence specifically affected your confidence.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so when you first get into an abusive relationship, it feels like healing, because oftentimes that person is in the wooing stage of the cycle. So they are putting you on a pedestal. So they're likely addressing some of those negative core beliefs or painful beliefs you might have about yourself that have been ingrained in you since you were a young child. And so in that phase, it's like, oh, this is bringing healing to me in a way that I maybe have never experienced before, or that just feels really good. And so being drawn to that relationship. Now, the abuse cycle is that the first stage is this wooing phase, this honeymoon phase. And that's the, oh my gosh, you're everything I've ever wanted. I can't believe I found someone like you. You're so amazing. And then you move into this tension building stage where things just start to feel a little different. And then there's the final part, is the acting out. And then that might be, if it's someone who's an aggressive abuser, it could be shouting at you, it could be physical. If there's someone who's more of a withdrawn abuser, more of a passive abuser, it might be a lengthy silent treatment, some kind of subtle gaslighting, something like that, to just kind of tear away at your feelings of self-worth and confidence that you may have. So, and then just as things start to get like, ooh, maybe this isn't a good relationship, or maybe I'm going to pull away a bit, then they'll circle back to the honeymoon, the wooing phase. And it's like, oh, yes, this is the person that I fell in love with. This is the person I thought you were. And it brings just enough healing and support for you to make it through another cycle. And all that time, you're just slowly stripping away those shreds of confidence that you had built over time, and they're being replaced with an emphasis on some of those negative core beliefs that you built in childhood, and they're just becoming more pronounced in your life, so that you become more doubtful of yourself over time.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you share that. I think I alluded to that my mom exuded this like confidence. I later realized it was probably like this more false sense of confidence, but she also, and I observed this cycle that you're describing. The only thing I would say is maybe that we refer to kind of that woo, and I'm like the love bombing, right?
Yeah.
It's like the
Oh,
over
yeah.
the top. So then it does build you back up, and it's these peaks and valleys. And while that's not my lived experience, observing it also does something to your psyche. And I
Yeah.
know you have a background in psychology,
Mhm.
which is also really interesting to be like in the real estate. And I'm like, how many lives have you lived, right? So when we were thinking about people that were going to come on, I'm like, this woman is, first of all, you look like you're 30 and you've lived at least four lives, right?
Well, thank you.
So
You're working against my self-doubt right now with all this buildup. Well, thank you. Thank you.
So I guess my question for you is, between all your education, your lived experiences, and just from an emotional standpoint, over the years, how has your relationship with self-doubt changed?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, if you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, and this can often come from people who have had either a traumatic childhood or deep insecurity, is at the beginning of this scale, your confidence is high and your knowledge is low. So I lived in that space for a long time. I was in a kind of religious group that had very strict beliefs, and I was very, very confident that I believed the right thing and I was living my life the right way. And I was very judgmental of myself and of others based on those standards. Confidence was high, knowledge was low. And so this Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias where people overestimate their skill. So I thought women were supposed to be cheerful and hold their families together at any cost. And I learned to push through pain instead of listen to it. So when I sort of crashed, which is what I talked about, 5 years ago, that was the first time I had publicly shared my story, when I crashed back in 2014 and left domestic violence and lost my friends and kicked out of my church and lost money and had no job and four little boys and had to start over. I crashed down that hill of that Dunning-Kruger effect. And I all of a sudden had almost no confidence, still no knowledge. And so from that space, the rebuild, instead of confidence, it took courage. So the rebuild was, I'm growing in knowledge, I'm paying attention. I'm listening to my pain instead of pushing through it. I'm listening to other people. I'm watching how the world works. And I'm neurodivergent too. I have ADHD. So it takes me a little longer sometimes to pick up on how the world works. So really had to train myself to pay attention, and use courage to work my way back up to a place. And courage is different than confidence because it doesn't require skill. It requires that you just move forward when you're not sure if the outcome is going to be okay. And as you practice courage over time, it becomes confidence because then you are building that skill. So then you move to a place in this Dunning-Kruger effect where you begin to have your confidence rise again. But I believe it's a more grounded confidence, and it comes with some knowledge and humility and self-awareness.
So that's a lot to consider for someone who maybe isn't a trained psychologist. So how did you get to that place, right? Is this something that you practiced, as a practitioner, or, just tell us a little bit about what that journey looks like and the psychology behind it for you.
Okay. So I think a lot of it is listening. I used to approach conversations with, what can I tell this person? What kind of power can I exert in this situation? And I started coming to conversations to hear them out, right? People were saying, hey, you've been offensive to me. The way you've treated me has felt judgmental. And rather than just getting defensive and fighting back on it, it was like, oh, tell me more. I want to understand. I want to grow, and to allow myself to sit in that shame. Big Brene Brown fan, right? So sitting in that shame and letting myself be vulnerable, and hear hard things about myself so that I could really understand myself better and how people receive me. And to this day, I still have those conversations. All right, I have a lot of energy. I do a lot of things, and there are times I'm bailing forward and I'm stepping on people's toes and I don't realize it. And so I am so grateful and honored when people sit down with me and say, hey, this thing you said or did, it affected me in this way. And it's like, oh, thank you so much for having the courage to share that with me. And so becoming less afraid of myself, so that I don't feel like I have this mask that I have to hide behind, or this, I have to defend myself as this person I have to prove to you that I have value. Instead, if my value is coming from this sense of we all have the same intrinsic value, the same worth, it's not based on our performance. And then if we all exist from that space, I don't have to prove anything to you. I just show up and you either want to spend time with me or you don't. And we move forward on our lives in that way.
The irony in what you're describing, though, is that you're saying be present in conflict in some respects and critique. Like the fact that somebody has to tell you, like, this is an attribute that has not been comfortable to deal with. And then the willingness to do the work is how you overcome the self doubt, acknowledging where you are. But like the idea that you have to hear bad things about yourself or things that you're uncomfortable with first to be able to grow is a lot to deal with.
Yeah, right.
It's
Really.
messy.
And that's where the self-doubt can come. The self-doubt can come from either an incident where, okay, I've done this before and I screwed it up and I'm afraid to do it again. Okay, the first business I started on my own, I had to sell at a loss. I lost a lot of money. So then starting this business, which is my third business, was like, it was a little scary because it's like, oh, I've lost money on a business before, right? And so there was some self-doubt. So that one was based on a prior failure. So, like you had said before, for that, it was just building a plan in place and knowing that it is possible to succeed in this. And so it's easier to work through that kind of self-doubt. The self-doubt that's trickier, I think, is when it's things that are hardwired into us from our early days before we were even cognizant of what we were taking in. And those are the ones that you feel a little bit more deeper, they feel a little more emotional about, and they take a little bit longer to work through. EMDR is super helpful for that. I'm doing that myself right now. And then there's also systemic self-doubt, which we can, get more into as well. But I think when you feel that self-doubt, be like, which bucket is this coming from? Is it because I failed at this before? Is it because there's something wired in me? Or is this a systems issue because of my gender, my race, my socioeconomic status?
And you mentioned earlier about our intrinsic value and how, we're often taught we need to prove ourselves. Do you think that applies more so to women than men?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. It's more likely for men to be assumed to be competent, especially in the workplace. They don't have to show up and prove that. Similarly, it's more common for white people to be assumed to be competent in any space. And so whenever you are not at that in the status that people just assume you know what you're doing, yeah, there is more work that you have to do in that space. And it's tricky to balance how do I just show up as me, courageous, confident, whatever that might look like, versus how much effort do I put into, wanting you to know that I'm competent, right? I think that's a tricky balance.
Yeah, it's kind of like we have to navigate being liked, but also be really good at what it is that we're doing. And that again is like a systemic thing, right? It doesn't necessarily come from, it's like things that we're acculturated to, indoctrinated, maybe even to some degree.
And women are more likely to, when they have bad feelings, such as self doubt, to internalize it and say, hey, what's wrong with me that I'm feeling doubtful, that I'm not feeling confident, right? And when it could be a systems issue, it could be a core belief from childhood, whereas men statistically are more likely to externalize bad feelings. So they're going to say, well, who did something wrong that is causing me to feel this way? If I'm angry, it's someone else's fault. That's more likely to be their default, and women's default is more likely to be, what did I do wrong? And so again, if we go back to domestic violence, if there's a conflict in a relationship like that, or even a boss and an employee, if there's a conflict, and the male or the person with more power is more likely to assume it's someone else's fault, and the other person is more likely to assume it's their fault. So then it just embeds this dynamic, this power dynamic even further, whereas where both people are blaming the same person, and it gets complicated.
Yeah. I'm curious if you can also talk about how you actually have pushed through times of self doubt. So I know you went back to law school with
Mm-hmm.
a full time job, a full time mom, obviously. How
Yeah.
did you? I have to imagine that there were times where you doubted your confidence along that journey. How did you push through?
So I would not recommend, law school for someone like when I was in my position. I I don't regret it. I had a full scholarship, so it was free, right? So that made the decision a little easier. And I was, wanting to use it for various purposes, personally and professionally. However, time management and organizing lots of processes and pieces and information and test taking, those all come easily to me. So it's kind of my sweet spot to juggle a lot of things and still feel like I can relax on Sundays and have good time with my kids and eat well and sleep well. That is not true for everyone, but everyone has their own sweet spot. I look online at people who are running marathons. That will never be my sweet spot. There's nothing in me that's like, I should figure out how to overcome my fears and become a marathon runner. I know that's not my sweet spot. I went running with my son one day, who is a good runner, and I was like, I'm huffing and puffing. And he was beside me, literally just fast walking. He's like, Mom, I can't decide if I should walk or run. Keep in
I,
mind, this was like a 5K. This was not a super long distance. So I just think it's more about like finding what your sweet spot is, and it doesn't need to be the same as the sweet spot of the person that you look up to or that you're next to or whatever that might be. You have your own sweet spot, your high functioning space, and whatever that is, and that you want to do, then you'll figure it out. You'll work your life around it, to figure it out.
I've never met you before. I'm so glad that I have. But as we were preparing for this, I was like, oh, this lady is either crazy or amazing.
I feel a little bit of both.
Yeah. And I'm like, I want to be in West Des Moines with like a cup of coffee in my hand. I've got to just spend more time with you and get a little, like just a fraction of the energy that you have. So that's pretty amazing.
That's very
We've
kind.
talked quite a bit about kind of the individual barriers, and even relationship barriers that impede our self-confidence or impact our self-doubt. I want to shift gears a little bit and maybe get your perspective on, ways that women can navigate improving their confidence when there are these systemic barriers. So what suggestions do you have for people who are there are social norms that maybe they've ascribed to or that we know exist, and they're trying to build their confidence within these structures.
Okay, so if I so I've done a fair amount of public speaking, but if I am telling someone else to try public speaking for the first time, if I tell them just go on stage and be confident, you got this, and they go on stage and they feel nervous and hesitant and they're sweating and they're like, this does not feel like confidence. I must be doing something wrong, or I'm not doing it right. But if I say, you know what, go on stage and just have courage. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to sweat. You're going to feel like you're going to throw up. You're going to feel like you're failing, right? That's what it's supposed to feel like. And so when we talk about building confidence, it's not supposed to feel like confidence. It's going to feel like courage. And when we get into that space, then when you step on the stage or you do the hard thing, you talk to your boss, whatever it might be, and you feel uncertain about yourself, then you're like, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This is what this means. I'm growing. And so managing your expectations of what it feels like to become more confident, and you keep stepping out and you keep acting with courage, and over time, then it doesn't take courage anymore, right? That, the first few times I stepped on a stage, it took a lot of courage, and now I can step on a stage and I don't need courage. Confidence just exists. And that will happen anytime you keep exercising that courage muscle. It will get strong over time. I think also it's good to have people in your life. Always, I like to have someone who's mentoring me and someone that I'm mentoring, right? So then we can be learning from someone else and passing what we're learning on to someone else as well. Because when we talk with especially with other women or women in our communities that are similar to us, it's like, oh, I'm not alone. This is not a me problem. Other people like me are experiencing this too. And when we feel less alone, we're less afraid, and then we can continue to take those steps.
Yeah. I really like the idea of just setting expectations that it's not going to be super easy. I
Mm-hmm.
also think, to your point around mentoring, there is an obligation to create space for other women. We know that women are disproportionately underrepresented in positions of power,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as you're looking at advancing to like CEO or C-suite types of positions. And I think reminding people that you do belong in this space is really important. And if you're not going to get that from your male colleague, at least I'm going to be, like I've told Emily before, a girl's girl, and I'm going to let you know that this is the space you're supposed to be in, and that it will be uncomfortable.
Yes, and if you have to, you build your own table. I mean, that's why I started my own company, right? So,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and yeah. So, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is as your impact grows, so does your risk exposure. So it's not that you arrive at this state where you're like, okay, I'm a confident leader now, I can go do all the things, right? As my career grew and I had more leadership opportunities and I was in front of larger audiences, my risk exposure also grew, which brings with it more praise, but also brings with it more criticism and more feedback that's hard to hear sometimes. And so you have to continually work through self-doubt. There is no finish line in this process. And I think managing that expectation is helpful too.
Well, you have provided the absolute perfect segue into our next segment, because I know Macy is going to be bringing someone on who has hit a finish line multiple times. Well,
Oh,
you'll
that's
understand
perfect.
that reference here in just a minute. But Melissa, I just have to tell you, it is a gift to be able to exude the level of energy and confidence that you're able to, even through this type of a platform. I feel like I know you and I feel like I want to get to know you more. And I'm just so thankful
Likewise.
that you've given us a bit of your time, but most importantly, your thought leadership as it relates to self confidence as well as dealing with self doubt. So thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Macy, we're going to turn things over to you for our next segment.
Thank you so much. I am very excited to announce this next guest, who is a personal friend of mine, Kasey Froeschle, and she's also an incredible distance runner. So I'm glad that you brought that up earlier. So Kasey is a 301 marathoner who's completed 7 full marathons, which was most recently the New York City Marathon as a guide runner for a woman who's visually impaired through Achilles International. She finished first at the SCOCO 50K in 2022, 2024, and 2025, and finished third at the Mines of Spain 100K in 2025. And Kasey works full-time at Sedgwick as a senior training consultant and helps her husband run Nonstop Race Management, which is a chip timing company based in Davenport, Iowa. And she's originally from Chicago, now living in Davenport with her husband and their 2 German short-haired pointers. So Kasey, I am so grateful that you took some time to be here and talk with me about running. I know just from knowing you personally over the years, you've run a lot of miles over the years. And I imagine that takes a lot of mental endurance. And you're probably constantly having to talk to yourself and having that internal dialogue about how you keep going. What do you tell yourself during those races when you feel like you're done and you're ready to quit?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, I am no stranger to those kinds of thoughts and just, self dialogue. While training for all these different races, you're definitely just kind of left to your own mental devices. And I kind of just think back to my first half marathon that I ran. I was doing it and I'm thinking, why am I doing this? Why does anyone do this? What's the point of this? And then I finished and I felt that feeling of crossing the finish line, crossing something off of my bucket list that I didn't necessarily think I'd be able to do. And chasing that feeling has kind of just, been growing over the years. And so, yeah, it's just, there are a lot of times where that kind of self-doubt creeps in kind of just naturally. I wasn't the most confident individual growing up. And so that kind of just came naturally, especially as I started all of this long distance training. And what I kind of try to remind myself or do when that does creep in is just remind myself of that why when I'm maybe running that race or doing that long training run that's really hard. And just remind myself that like I signed up or set out for a goal because it's realistic. And while I may not always feel like it's attainable in that moment, I just try to keep pushing and holding on, and reminding myself that like future me will be so proud of past or current me if I keep pushing through maybe these miles that are getting hard. And I've succumbed to that, kind of darker place in my mind during some runs where like maybe I'll stop or, just, maybe, yeah, just kind of step back and maybe the pace that I'm doing, whereas that wasn't maybe my goal. And feeling that feeling of kind of some slight disappointment in myself for succumbing to those darker thoughts isn't a great feeling. But like the ladies before were kind of speaking to, being vulnerable with that and being like, okay, I felt that way and gave in that one time. I know how it felt. I didn't love how it felt. So let's kind of just grow from that. And, I'm a sucker for some of those cheesy mantras sometimes. It depends on the day and, things of just, reminding myself that like, if you think you can't, you can, and just, getting comfortable in being uncomfortable. Because also too, like Dr. Vine, I think mentioned before, this, when you're doing some of these distances or, harder paces, it should be uncomfortable and you only grow when you're outside of that, comfortability, that comfort zone. And so just getting used to that definitely takes some time and it's a lot easier said than done. But yes, it's a muscle that is always being flexed, most
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine. I love that you've set high expectations for yourself and you've been able to hold yourself to them and then probably give yourself grace when maybe you don't reach them as you had hoped. I also know that you started running more late as an adult rather than when you were in like middle school and high school. And I'm curious how these conversations you're having with yourself and these expectations that you're holding yourself to, how has that kind of trickled into your or other aspects of your life outside of running?
Growing up, I wasn't the most confident individual, and this running longer distances I've kind of taken up later in life. It's what undoubtedly made me more confident in myself, and kind of gave me that courage to kind of sit in my accomplishments and acknowledge that like I can do more than maybe I thought I could. And I can push myself past those limits that, I maybe set on myself or, systemically have been put on me. And that's been, I think, one of the, largest takeaways that I have from this long distance running. Whether it's, going after maybe a position at work that I didn't maybe think I was necessarily equipped for, but I know the things and can do that. And even just kind of in small day-to-day tasks, like running all of those miles gets is monotonous. It gets old sometimes. Sometimes, time goes by slower than others on certain days. And so just kind of getting used to and just pushing through maybe those dull moments or not as exciting moments or runs, kind of carries into maybe pushing through those household chores that I may be putting off or doing those things that are, outstanding that I know I can just get done if I just push through it, big or small, whether it's unloading the dishwasher or, having that hard conversation that isn't, the most exciting to have. That's, I think, probably one of the biggest takeaways, that I've seen in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's lovely. Just to share a little bit of a personal story, Kasey and her husband, Steven, helped me run a half marathon this past spring, and you guys' encouragement was huge for me finishing that. And I know that you have a really great group of women around you in Davenport who you run with frequently, including your sisters-in-law and your friend Kelsey, who helped you pace your 100K. What does having a supportive group of women around you and kind of externalizing that internal dialogue, how does that push you and help you tackle these endeavors?
I could not do any of this probably if I didn't have them, or I would do it, but probably not to the extent or as like confidently as I have. I'm lucky and, lucky enough to have a supportive partner, in my husband, Steven. And of course, he'll maybe see things that I don't, or think that I, see larger goals for myself than maybe I could. And it's one thing to have that from a supportive partner, which I'm very thankful for, but it's kind of another than to kind of hear that or see yourself through your female peers, and to have that kind of support outside of the home, like my partner, is huge. And to be able to have like-minded women who were logging those kind of monotonous miles together, we're going through similar struggles, both physically and mentally, with training for these races that we've set our goals for while juggling just life. I don't have any kids, but I have some friends who do have kids and families. And so juggling that on top of their training, and just we're able to provide each other with kind of a sounding board that we may not necessarily like get at home with our partners. And it just, it's incredible. And, sometimes just talking about these things, with other people outside of kind of your normal, day-to-day circle, it just, things can resonate differently. And it's a great sounding board to have, like I said, kind of just with like-minded female support. That is kind of, can't compare it to maybe some male partners.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily maybe get it all.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm excited to continue cheering you on from the sidelines because I will not be running marathons with you again. But I just appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and share how you kind of work with against your self-doubt, and all of that good stuff. So with that, I will send it back to Ladrina and she will wrap us up.
Thank you so much. This was a fabulous opportunity for us to learn from some really inspiring women across our state. A couple of things that stood out to me from today's conversation. Kasey mentioned kind of finding what you can do, which in her case is the marathons, and then building on that and applying it to other places. So, I was able to do this, so therefore I can try this. And so I really love this idea that you are going to keep showing up to build that confidence, and that the confidence follows the courage to just show up and keep pushing through when it's hard, whether it's a marathon or showing up in that meeting or applying for that job. I think that applies to many situations. So I believe Melissa, paraphrasing, kind of said, finding your thing. So running your own race and finding your zone of excellence, I think, is really important so that you can keep your pace, not someone else's pace. I know that comparison can be the thief of joy. So really just doing the work. It's called self-confidence for a reason, right? It's yours. It's not based on what other people are doing. And I think the most important thing that I take away from all of this is that self-confidence isn't a destination, it's a continuous race. And so don't expect it to just start to get easy. You have to keep pushing through in order for you to gain that confidence and then get closer to it being a little bit more comfortable. I thank you, our listeners, and for tuning in to another episode. And I want you to remember, be bold, be brilliant, and be fearless.